So yeah, I'll start by introducing myself and Audacia as a company. So yeah, Audacia, we're a software consultancy. We're based in Leeds. We cover um, software engineering, test engineering, cloud, data, AI. I'm the technical director here, so my background is in software development. So I've been working in the industry for kind of 15, 20 years or so. With Audacia for the last 6 years as head of engineering, and then lately as technical director. So what I'm going to be talking about today is engineer experience. We're going to talk a lot about what it is, how you should measure it. We'll go into quite a lot of detail about what we do here at Audacia. But yeah, kind of engineer experience is the kind of thread underpinning what we're kind of going to go through. So yeah, so here's a quick kind of overview of the session. Yeah, we'll start by giving a bit of a definition of engineer experience, sometimes called developer experience, and we'll go into kind of different ways to measure it. And then I'll do a bit of a deep dive in what we do at Audacia, how we measure it, why we measure it, what we hope to get out of it. And then there'll be a Q&A, bit of a Q&A at the end, if anyone has any questions. But like I said at the start, please do kind of pop them in the Q&A in Zoom as we're going along as well. So yeah, we'll start with what is engineer experience. So there are lots and lots of different definitions out there. You can kind of go onto pretty much any kind of tech company's website. They'll probably have a definition of, if not engineer experience, then definitely developer experience or DevX. They're all kind of variations on a theme. I think the GitHub definition, it just kind of read a bit better to me. So yeah, so it's about examining how people, processes, tools affect developers or engineers' ability to work efficiently. I think the last bit is really the key bit. So it's about, so I guess the movement kind of came about with a recognition that the bottleneck in terms of the ability to deliver software of high quality at good speed, that bottleneck is often either the cost or the availability or the ability of developers or engineers to kind of work quickly. Usually the most expensive resource on any software project is the people themselves. So the better use you can make of your people, the more efficiently they can work, clearly the better value for money you're going to be able to offer. And also, if your engineers are constantly facing kind of bottlenecks and blockers and, inefficient tooling, slow laptops, build queues that are hours long, all of these things are going to slow the team down and affect how they're able to deliver value to the end user. So it's really about kind of bringing that engineer experience front and center and recognizing that by investing usually kind of not very much time, effort, or money, you can actually unblock engineers to deliver much faster and usually get kind of orders of magnitude return on investment. So that's kind of where it came about, and that's what most of the definitions will talk about. It's about kind of essentially unblocking engineers to allow them to work as efficiently as possible. So it's really important to measure it. You might have kind of blockers and inefficiencies that you're just not aware of because you're not kind of asking the people. So generally speaking, the best way of measuring engineer experience and measuring the effectiveness and the efficiency at which engineers can work is actually by asking the people themselves. So there are all kinds of metrics that you can get, things like the DORA metrics, and so there are measurements you can take, and you can how long are my build times, how frequently are we deploying to production, things like that. So you can get those metrics out, but without actually asking the people themselves, you're going to miss out on a whole kind of class of things that could be bottlenecks, that could be blockers. So asking engineers, and usually that's done in the form of some kind of survey, so an engineer experience survey, or developer experience survey would often be the way to approach this. And we'll come on to that in a lot more detail in a short while. And yeah, why is it important to measure? Well, it allows you to identify the inefficiencies. So, you may be able to kind of get some metrics, and you may see that, well, we're only able to deploy to production once a month or something. Well, why is that? So that, and by asking the questions, it allows you to kind of drill down into the detail as to what is going wrong in the process that is causing those inefficiencies. It also allows you to ask your engineers about the tools, the software, the frameworks that they're actually working with. Are they fit for purpose? Are you on the kind of up to date tech stacks? As an engineering leader, I spend a lot of my time just trying to keep up to date with everything new that's coming out, especially in the world of AI, with so much more tooling now around. It becomes increasingly difficult for one individual or one leadership team to kind of keep up to date with the whole breadth of technology that there is out there. You'll have a whole team of engineers who are usually keeping up to date kind of far more effectively than you can, and usually have that kind of very deep knowledge on their specific kind of areas of interest. So by asking them about the tools, the technologies, the frameworks that they're using, you're actually kind of going to get opinions from the people closest to it about, how happy are they with those? How effective are they in terms of solving the problems that they're facing day to day? Finding pain points. So, job satisfaction is really, really important for anyone. Software engineers, certainly the best software engineers, are in very, very high demand. So as an employer, the last thing I can afford to do is to have people, not particularly satisfied in their role, whether it's because, I really want to use this particular technology and I'm not allowed, or every time I try and queue a build, I'm sat there waiting for 3 hours, and I'm just not able to be as productive as I want to be. All it takes is for a few of those things to stack up, and people will start looking elsewhere. So by identifying those pain points, you can actually address them and just make all of your engineers much happier in their role. It also allows you to kind of get engagement from people. So what people, I think anyone really, really likes actually being asked their opinion and having their opinion valued. If I as an engineering leader were to kind of just mandate, this is what's important for us as a company, this is what I'm going to do, these are the frameworks we're going to use, these are the IDEs we're going to use, these are the products that you can have a license for, people will very quickly feel kind of disempowered and not necessarily kind of bought in. Whereas if you're actually asking people's opinion and taking that on board, they're going to kind of get on the train with you and really have that kind of buy-in as to what you're trying to do as an engineering organization. So I'd say they're the four kind of key things about why it's really, really important to be doing these surveys and to measure these things. So there are a few kind of little tips and best practices and things that I would encourage you to kind of keep in mind if you are embarking on your own survey, or just kind of asking your engineers what's important to them. So I think the first thing is to make sure you're asking about things that you actually do control. So I'll give an example. So imagine as a company you are using JavaScript as your programming language, and let's say, for argument's sake, there is a constraint or a set of constraints that means that is not going to change. So you're a JavaScript shop, and that's kind of what it has to be. Asking in a survey how satisfied are you with the programming language that you use day to day is probably not going to add a huge amount of value, because whether they're satisfied or not is not something that you can change. So if you do have people dissatisfied, all you're going to do is kind of draw attention to the fact that they are dissatisfied, but then given that you can't do anything about it, there's not a huge amount of value in that you can get out of that question. So I think definitely ask about things that are in your control that you can actually change. I guess the second thing is about focusing on what's important to your organization. So there are a number of resources out there online, so you can get kind of template surveys and example questions, and they're all really, really useful as a starting point, but every organization is different. So I definitely encourage people to use those examples and templates as a starting point, and then add new questions, remove questions, modify questions, make sure that the survey kind of speaks to you and your organization. be consistent. So I think a survey, you can just run a one-off survey and it will get kind of a bit of a pulse check on how your engineers are feeling. But where it becomes really powerful is when it's run on a regular cadence, because by doing that, you can actually measure progress and hopefully improvements. And that's where consistency is really important. If you're changing the questions you're asking survey after survey, you're never going to be able to kind of measure any trends. So at least have quite a high proportion of your questions be consistent, so that you have this kind of baseline that you can kind of track. So that if you are trying to make improvements and making changes between surveys, you can actually see, well, we scored 3.5 out of 5 last time, we're now up at 4 out of 5. That change we made was probably a good change. We'll continue doing that. So it allows you to get kind of direct feedback on the improvements that you're making. Role-specific questions. So, most companies will have different kinds of engineers. So engineers working in different areas. You might have software engineers, test engineers, cloud engineers, kind of data engineers, data scientists, all those different kinds of roles. There will be a number of questions that are applicable to all roles. So just ask them of everyone. But then I do think it's important to then have a subset of questions that kind of speak to an individual role. So ask your testers how they feel about, the split between automation and manual testing. Ask your software developers how they feel about unit testing. Ask your cloud engineers how they feel about your kind of cloud provider of choice, or your infrastructure as code kind of tool chain. So definitely kind of run a single survey, but have kind of places within that where you can kind of branch out and ask different things of different roles. Anonymity is a really interesting one. So I guess opinions differ on whether these kind of surveys should be anonymous. And there's definitely pros and cons of both approaches. Most people feel more comfortable giving kind of honest, robust feedback if it's anonymous. But anonymous feedback can be harder to action because you can't ask any follow-up questions. You don't know exactly what the motivation behind it was, or you don't really fully understand maybe the context behind the feedback or a particular comment or something like that. A really, really good example is suppose you run an engineering organization of 100 people, and you ask a question around system documentation. How good is the documentation for the systems that you work on? If you've got 97 out of 100 engineers saying the documentation is amazing, it's the best I've ever worked with, this is absolutely fantastic, and then you had 3 engineers saying there is definitely actually room for improvement, there's good bits and bad bits, but I do think we should focus on this as an area of improvement. If all I was, as a leader, if all I was to get was that kind of headline figure, 97% of engineers think documentation is fantastic, I would be like, brilliant, that's definitely not going to be anywhere near the top of my priority list. We're obviously doing something really good there. If I knew, not necessarily who the individuals were, but that the 3 people who think documentation can be improved are all working on the same team, and maybe they are the only 3 members of that team, that is actually then very, very different feedback to receive, because then that there needs to be some targeted improvement on that particular team. And also you've actually got loads and loads of good things happening, so there's loads of good lessons that can be learned from other teams to bring into this team of 3 that's potentially struggling. So I'll come on to this a little bit later, but yeah, think about how you can maintain anonymity while still kind of giving people ways to provide more context such that the feedback is actionable, because that's really the key thing. Strike a balance between quantitative and qualitative feedback. So quantitative feedback is brilliant for being able to measure trends. We were 3 out of 5 last time, we're 4 out of 5 this time. So by asking people, score system documentation 1 out of 5, 1 is it's terrible, 5 is it's brilliant. Asking a lot of those questions allows you to get a really, really easy and quick visibility of pain points. They tend to be the lowest scoring questions, and also measure trends over time, assuming you're kind of running these surveys on a regular cadence. And probably the most important thing is to actually follow through with change. Nobody likes, you know, I said before, people love being asked their opinion. What nobody likes is to be asked their opinion and then have their opinion be ignored. So either follow through with actual change, or if you receive feedback and change cannot be actioned for whatever reason, you know, there's some kind of constraints around maybe cost or time, make it clear that, you know, the feedback has been heard, this is what we would love to do, this is why we can't action that at this point in time. Because by opening up that conversation, I guess you also then, you know, you make people aware of the constraints that you're under as a leader. You know, you'll have finite time and budget to make these kind of changes. But yeah, you've got to follow up with either change or some kind of conversation about the feedback. So that's really, really crucial, because without doing that, what you'll see is you'll see engagement drop off. You know, you'll see response rates drop off. You'll see, you know, people just gradually becoming disengaged in the process. So what I'm going to kind of talk through now is I'll give a bit of an overview of how we run surveys at Audacia and about kind of the kind of questions we ask and what we hope to get out of our surveys. So we run them. So we run kind of, you know, I was talking about this mix of quantitative and qualitative feedback. So the questions we ask are all kind of, you know, numeric, score this, you know, 1 to 5, or strongly disagree to strongly agree, that kind of thing. But then we also have optional free text kind of answers for every question, so that people have the opportunity to provide more context should they wish to do so. And that's usually where a lot of the valuable feedback comes in, because somebody scoring something 1 out of 5 is one thing. Somebody scoring something 1 out of 5 and then explaining why they've scored it 1 out of 5 is, you know, a lot more valuable, because then you can pinpoint where the actual issues are, and you can, like I said before, it then becomes a lot more actionable. Yeah, we do have this kind of mix of general and role-specific questions. So yeah, we have, you know, some questions specific for our test engineers, let's say, or software engineers, but most of them are kind of general questions that apply to everyone. Our surveys are anonymous, but the 2 pieces of information that we do capture are an individual's role and the project or the team that they work on. You know, all of our teams are bigger than, you know, 3 people. So, you know, knowing what project somebody's working on, we're still able to kind of maintain that element of anonymity. But what it does mean is that, you know, I guess generally speaking, in my experience, where if there is some kind of systematic difference in experience, you know, a group of people over here having a really positive experience and a different group of people over here having a kind of largely negative experience around something, you know, maybe system documentation or, you know, kind of tools that they're using. The 2 things that tend to impact those are the role people work in, or the team that they're working on. You know, different teams might use different tools or might have different standards around how they document things. And then certainly different roles will have kind of different tool sets, will have, you know, face different challenges. So by capturing those 2 things, we're generally able to then drill down into enough detail to spot kind of specific kind of systematic trends in a particular area, be it a particular project team or a particular role. But we also then, you know, we can't pin responses down to an individual either. So people can more freely share their feedback, given that it's, you know, it's not going to be tied back to the individual. So we find that that's a really, really good balance for us. And then the 6 areas that we ask about, I'll talk through these. These are on the next few slides, but yeah, these, you know, this is where it's really about making the survey work for you as an organisation. Different organisations will have different areas that are really important to them. These were the 6 areas that we kind of decided were important enough to warrant a kind of a section of the survey for themselves. So for documentation and knowledge sharing, I think this probably applies to most companies. I think it's very, very important for us as a consultancy, because what we're doing day to day is we've got kind of project teams. So each team is dedicated to a particular client. So each of our teams are usually working in entirely different business domains, developing very, very different pieces of software. You know, it's not like we're a kind of product company where you'll still have different teams, but everyone's usually kind of working in the same kind of product set or the same industry, because you're all building something that's working towards the same end goal. In a consultancy, it's a lot more disparate, because you're generally doing very client-specific work. It's very, very easy for each team to then become very siloed, and for knowledge to kind of not necessarily be shared more widely than that team. So for us, measuring how well we're sharing knowledge between teams is really, really important. So the question around knowledge sharing that we usually ask is around how often people are able to learn from what is going on other projects. Are you able to learn lessons because of something that happened elsewhere? Whether it's a success or a challenge. And yeah, you can, what it tells you is, how often are you just reinventing the wheel? How often are you repeating the same mistakes project after project, because project B over here didn't know that project A solved that very same problem a few months ago. Then in terms of the documentation, this is really, really important to ask to kind of get a handle on how quickly you can onboard people. In an ideal world, if people are kind of starting on a new project or working on a new area of a code base, you want them to be able to kind of get up to speed and upskill on that very, very rapidly, usually independently. If somebody has a question about how a piece of an area of the code base works, or why a certain architectural decision was made, can they search through the documentation to find that, or do they need to ask an individual, usually the same individual, and that individual then becomes a bottleneck for onboarding anyone new? So how often are people actually able to just consult the documentation and answer their own questions? And that is going to tell you how quickly you can onboard new engineers. How quickly could we ramp up this team if we have, if we onboard a new client and we need to quickly double the throughput of the team, can we ramp up headcount really, really rapidly? So it's asking you some really, really valuable things. So technical standards. Standards should ultimately help you as an organization ship better code, better quality code, and hopefully do it more quickly as well. So by asking about the standards, you can very, very quickly get a kind of pulse check on, do the standards help? Are they a help or a hindrance? Sometimes you can have just way too many standards, nobody really knows whether you're coming or going with them, they're changing frequently. So all of those things tend to slow people down rather than speed them up, because they spend ages trawling through standards. What's the right approach for this? Whereas if you can have some really easily discoverable, concise, clear standards, hopefully they then speed the team up. You can ship better quality code. And so you're asking around, how do the standards help you? Are they easy to consume? How often do you kind of consult the standards? Are they a part of your day-to-day life as an engineer, or are they just kind of off in a wiki somewhere and you've never even seen them? So yeah, it's really, really helpful to know what purpose the standards are serving and how they're helping. Project delivery. I think most software teams are building to some kind of plan or roadmap. Most teams nowadays are usually using some form of agile. So asking them around the agile processes that the team is following, are they a help? Are they a hindrance? Are you stuck in, do the stand-ups take 2 hours every morning because everyone has to say their kind of 2 pence worth? Do you have retrospectives as a team? Are you actually actioning things from retrospectives? Are you continuously improving as a team? All of these things that should be kind of part of how agile teams work, often kind of maybe don't work too well in practice. So by asking the team, you can quite easily kind of pinpoint where you need to improve to be kind of following those best practices. And it's also ultimately around recognizing that your job as a software team is to deliver value to an end user, to a client. So by asking teams how effectively they think they're able to do that, you can make efficiencies there. If builds are taking 2 hours because there's always a massive queue, or we can only deploy at this particular time on this particular day because the one person who can approve releases is never around. All of those bottlenecks are going to stop you delivering that value. So by asking those questions, you can really, really easily get to the bottom of how you can improve your project delivery. Observability, so especially if you're actually supporting the software that you're building in production, yeah, asking things around if something happens in production, there's a bug or production goes down, how are you finding out about that? Is it when a customer picks up the phone and says production's on fire, or is it when you get an alert through and actually you're able to be proactive and inform the customer there's a potential issue, this is what we're doing to mitigate it? And if there is a bug or something in production, how quickly can you actually diagnose that? Is the first thing that you have to do deploy a new version of the software with a load of logging added? That's usually a sign that observability is not where it needs to be. But if you can kind of really quickly identify bugs because you can see what's going on, you can see the exceptions being logged, you can see you can see that kind of path through the system that the code was taking. You can usually diagnose the bugs more quickly, patch them, get them out before they've had a significant impact to the end user. Quality, so this is a really kind of quite a broad subject area, but if you're doing code reviews, do those code reviews actually add value? Are they just slowing the team down? What's the kind of automated test story? Are people writing automated tests? What then happens to those tests? Are they run regularly? Are they delivering valuable feedback? If there's a regression bug, do the tests pick those regression bugs up? Because having, it's very, very easy to kind of put things in place, things like code reviews, things like automated testing policies. It's very easy to put those in place. It's then also easy to have those things become a bottleneck rather than an enabler and things that are actually speeding the team up and improving quality. So by actually asking around, what value are people getting from these things, you can identify where, maybe your code review policy is not adding value. It's just slowing down people. It's just adding a bottleneck. And then, the last section is around tools, technologies, and practices. So this is probably one of the most important ones. It's, as an engineer, you probably come on in the morning, you're going to be spending a lot of the day writing code. Most engineers live in their IDE. They live with their tooling, with the programming languages they're using, the frameworks that they're using. There's usually no bigger impact on the job satisfaction of an engineer as the tools, the frameworks, the languages that they're using. So by asking them about those things, you can really, really easily identify where your potentially job satisfaction is suffering because people are stuck on some outdated framework that is going to be out of support soon, that it's just not what, maybe they've got friends at other companies or people within your company working on other teams who are on the latest and greatest frameworks, and they're just feeling more and more left behind. Identifying those areas and those kind of pockets of dissatisfaction, and that's where having the kind of responses kind of sliced by team or by project can be really powerful, because usually your projects will be on a specific tech stack. So if you know that most people in your company are really happy with your tooling and technologies, but there's this one project where they're really, really unhappy, well, let's have a talk with them, let's understand what's going on there. Can we actually kind of re-platform that, get it on something a bit more new, so they're not feeling as kind of left behind. So we're nearly at the end. So just some key takeaways to, if you leave with nothing else, just remember these 4 points. So first of all, surveys being a really valuable way of getting the feedback. When you're putting together your surveys, focus on things that you can actually control. Don't ask questions that you just have absolutely no chance of changing. Once you get the feedback, you need to action it, or at least have a conversation about it. You need to follow through on change and on kind of delivering the feedback back to the organisation. And then fourth, kind of focus on what's important to you. Every organisation is different. Every organisation will have kind of specific needs, specific pain points. You know your organisation, your engineers better than anyone. So don't necessarily be steered too much by what other people are doing, by the questions they're asking. Ask the questions that you want to ask and that are important to you. So I'll just have a little check of the Q&A. So there are a few questions which are really nice, so I'll just kind of go through those. I'll, as you can see on the slides, we do have another one of these coming up in April, so details are on the website about that. I'll kind of talk briefly about that at the end. So yeah, a couple of really good questions. So what's the most surprising thing you learned or realised as a result of an engineer survey? That's a really good question. So what I often find surprising is just how much kind of different teams can differ in their experiences. As an organisation, there are some areas where the results are remarkably consistent. So from project to project, everyone usually thinks broadly the same about our tools, our technologies, our practices, because we do have a fair amount of consistency there. But if you're asking a question around things like documentation, you'll just get wildly different results from team to team. So that's where knowing what team people are working on is really useful, because then got a team over here scoring 5 out of 5 on documentation, a team over here scoring 2 out of 5. Well, let's link up one person from each team to have that conversation. What's the 5 out of 5 team doing, and what's the 2 out of 5 team not doing? And let's just try and get a bit more consistency in that area. Yeah, and another one, a really good question here. So this is coming from the point of view of a team lead. How can a team lead take some company-wide survey results and turn them into meaningful team-level improvements? So I think there's probably two sides of this. One is by kind of having the feedback down at project level, you can really drive some of those improvements. So one of the things that I usually do, so we've just run our annual survey in February, so I'm still kind of going through the results, and one of my tasks will be to take that kind of cut of results by project and take that to the project team, to the lead developers on that team, and say, these are, you've seen the company level results, these are the results for your project, and actually have that conversation with them, and define some actions as how they can kind of improve things for their people. And I think usually the first thing there is to actually have a direct conversation with your team. If you're doing like sprint retrospectives or something like that, it's the ideal opportunity to take that feedback in. So, as a lead developer, take the survey feedback for your project in, and actually have some direct questions with the engineers. It looks like we've got high satisfaction in this area, but relatively low satisfaction in this area. How can we maintain the high satisfaction and address what's maybe not going so well? So I think it is then about having more of those kind of one-to-one or kind of small kind of group-led conversations. I think there's one more question, which is around kind of response rates and engagement, and how to get the best response rate, how to get the best engagement out of this. Do you just kind of email out a link and expect people to fill it in? Is it a mandatory thing? Is it an optional thing? So the number one thing I'd say is that it has to be optional. As soon as you start mandating something, people feel forced into doing it, and you're not going to get the results from that you want. So I think it has to be optional. But clearly, if you only get like 10% response rate, it's not going to be representative. So you want as good a response rate as you can. I think the kind of 3 ways really of achieving that. One is to, if people have seen previous surveys and have seen change being made as a result of them, as a result of the surveys that have positively impacted them as individuals, they are more likely to engage going forward. So by actually following through on change, that's the number one thing you can do. I think the other thing you can do is work with your teams. So we had the question around how can a team lead take the results and apply them to their project. And I think as a leader, I kind of work quite hard to get engagement about the survey before it's even run. Talk to my lead developers and say, we're in the survey. It'll be really good if you can kind of speak to the team, encourage the team around filling it in, and just make sure that buy-in is being kind of passed through all the way down the company through your engineering leaders. And I think the third thing is kind of recognise that what you want to get out of a survey is you want honest feedback and you want actionable feedback. And it's not all about driving a high response rate. So every survey that we run, I always get a couple of individuals contact me directly saying, I'm not going to fill in the survey. And it's often because, you know, somebody's role has changed recently. They're not as hands-on as they used to be. They don't feel like close enough to the detail to actually be able to offer an opinion across the board. So by completing it, they just, you know, they don't want to skew the results and all those kind of things, which is absolutely fair enough. But they'll often contact me directly and say, I can't give an opinion on the whole thing, so I'm not going to fill in the survey, but here's some really specific feedback from things that I've spotted, or things that are more in my kind of area of expertise. And that's absolutely fine, because all that feedback kind of goes into the same place. It can all feed into the improvements that you're making. So to some extent, it doesn't matter whether everyone's kind of filling in the survey, as long as you're still kind of getting that feedback through. So that's the other thing I would say. So unless anyone's got any last minute questions, I'll give people another 1 minute to kind of get those in. But whilst we're waiting for that, I will just draw attention to the putting the CD into CI/CD talk, which is 24th of April, same time, 12:30. So that'll be run by Akil and Luke, who are a couple of my principal engineers. So yeah, kind of talking about, I guess, this is coming into the kind of delivery of value to clients, and some of the technical enablers that we can put in place to just make sure we're delivering good quality value to end users as fast as possible. So please do sign up and go on our website. There's a sign up there. I'll be there. I'll be kind of listening in. It'll be a really, really interesting one. If you have any ideas for talks that you want to hear about, you know, anything that you want us to be talking about in these events, we do run them every month. Please do email us. So talks@audacia.co.uk is the best place to send that kind of feedback in. Equally, kind of get in touch if you just want to chat about something, some of the problems that you're facing. I'm more than happy to kind of, you know, touch base with anyone else out there who wants to run a survey, who, you know, wants to kind of dive into a bit more detail about how we do it. Happy to send the slides out to anyone that wants them. So yeah, please do get in touch. I'm more than happy to speak to anyone about this. It's a area that I'm quite passionate about, really interested in. So it'd be interesting to hear from other people about how you're tackling these same problems. So I think that's it. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for giving up half an hour of your afternoon, especially on such a beautiful day. So yeah, have a good rest of the week, everyone, and yeah, hope to catch you at our next talk. Thanks a lot.